Well, good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our intern projects webinar for the Lake States Fire Science Consortium. I'm Jack McGunn-Stinsky, and I'll be moderating the webinar. We're going to be hearing about our 3 intern projects that we helped to fund in 2017. A little information about our internship funding program. The intent of providing funding for an undergraduate student is twofold. We want to enhance the opportunities for managers and scientists to work together, and we want to expose future professionals to opportunities of management and research collaborations. Proposals were developed by joint manager-scientist teams and outline how the research internship will address a critical need that will help improve management of northern fire-dependent ecosystems of the Lake States region. Before I get started, let's take a few seconds to look at our Adobe Connect webinar interface. To ask a question or interact with the attendees, please use the chat box located in the lower right-hand portion of your screen, and make sure that once you type your question, you also click the send button. We'll be monitoring these questions and make sure that there's an opportunity to address them. For anybody who is joining the audio by phone that is not one of the presenters, I ask that you please hang up and listen through your computer speakers. We're going to have multiple opportunities throughout this, so after each presentation, we'll have a short question and answer period, and then at the very end, we'll also have more opportunities for questions. So in the interest of time, I'm going to let the presenters introduce themselves as part of their presentation. So with that, I'm going to turn control over to Sarah and Ryan. Take it away.
Hello, this is Ryan Raschke. I am the research intern from Northland College for the 2017 field season, and today I'll be talking to you about leveraging research and monitoring networks to inform the management of the Chryxus Arctic butterfly and the globally rare Pine Barrens ecosystem, or how I learned to stop worrying and love studying butterflies. And presenting with me today are Crystal Kern and Brian Harenga from the Forest Service Northern Research Station here in northern Wisconsin, and I will turn it over to them to talk to you about the restoration overview of the Pine Barrens.
Good morning. This is Brian Harenga, and I'm the wildlife biologist for the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest and the Washburn Ranger District. And the Muckwa Barrens is located within the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest in northern Wisconsin. You can see it there on the map on the right of the screen. And the Muckwa Barrens is indicated by the red square. Around the time of European settlement, there were approximately 2.3 million acres of pine barrens in Wisconsin. Today, only about 1% remains, and the Muckwa Barrens represents one of the largest continuous pieces in the state. About 8,000 acres were set aside in 1965 as the Muckwa Barrens Wildlife Management Area, and this acreage was expanded to a core area of 12,500 acres, along with over 10,000 acres of additional satellite barrens for a total of 22,900 acres being managed by the Forest Service through the Northwest Sands Project. Through prescribed fire, timber harvest, and mechanical treatments, Muckwa can be characterized by a mosaic of continually changing savanna-type communities. And we use established fire mound plots to monitor vegetation outcomes from the various treatments, and management of this ecosystem benefits several rare and area-sensitive species, such as the Chryxus Arctic butterfly and the sharp-tailed grouse.
This is Crystal Kern, Research Forester at the U.S. Forest Service Northern Research Station. The Northwest Sands Project at the Muckwa Barrens posed an opportunity for research, so myself and others from the station and Michigan State University initiated a study of soil heating effects of prescribed fire with the support of a joint fire sciences grant in 2015. While the Northwest Sands Project and research has had success, there still remains many questions. For instance, the understanding in the region is that Danthonia, or poverty oakgrass, was important to the larval stage of the life cycle of the Chryxus Arctic butterfly. What is the potential suitable habitat in the Muckwa Barrens for this sensitive species? Well, myself, Sarah Johnson from Northland College, and Brian were interested in this question. We saw that the robust distribution of the veg data that we could pull from the FireMon monitoring plots and the research plots, and the information that the forest had on this butterfly would be a perfect research management opportunity for a Lake States Fire Science Consortium intern. So Ryan Raschke, your presenter today, was the intern hired to explore this notion using our data and the existing literature.
So to give you an overview of what was happening over the summer, the initial focus of the study entailed learning as much as possible from the Forest Service research and existing literature about the natural history of Danthonia and Chryxus. As the project commenced, significant gaps in the study of the Chryxus Arctic butterfly began to emerge, specifically in the understanding of the natural history of the eastern subspecies Oenius chryxus strigulosa that is found within the Great Lakes region. Because of this, the objectives of the study evolved to become: 1, conduct a literature review of the natural history of Chryxus Arctic. 2, link information from the literature on preferred food sources with vegetation data from existing monitoring plots to create a habitat suitability map for Chryxus in the Muckwa Barrens. And one of the primary components of the summer internship was collecting vegetation data out in the Barrens, the role of which will be discussed in a later slide. So, the role of fire in managing and maintaining butterfly habitat. There was some debate in the literature about butterfly response to fire as a management tool. In a 1998 paper by Anna Swinjel, it was stated that butterflies of prairie and savanna, particularly specialists, are often assumed to be fire adapted. Even if individuals die as a result of fire, the species are expected to recover and thrive because fire would properly maintain the habitat they require. Too frequent or too large of fires might extirpate rare butterflies, so that reduced fire and alternative managements would be preferable. Then in a 2001 publication by Swinjel and Swinjel, they emphasize avoiding over-reliance on one management type over others, and Vogel et al. In 2007 notes that responses to fire vary among butterfly species, indicating a need for species-specific studies. Now, in terms of success stories with utilizing fire to manage butterfly habitat, the Carner blue butterfly was an endangered lepidopteran threatened by lack of habitat, and the application of prescribed fire proved highly successful in restoring the Carner blue population while also improving habitat for other rare and specialized species. So Oenius chryxus strigulosa, again, is the eastern subspecies of the Chryxus Arctic butterfly that is found in the Lake States region. For identification, it has a wingspan ranging from 1.5 inches for the males to 2.25 inches for the females. Above, the hind wing is orange with brown mottled edges and a single marginal eye spot. Brown orange banded forewing with 4 to 6 eye spots. And below, the hind wing has a mottled brown-gray with fine striations, white veins in a dark median band. The forewings are orange-brown with a submarginal row of black spots. And the hind wing, there is a dark post-median line with a sharp outward-pointing tooth you can see here, which is one of the key identifying factors. The life history of the butterfly: the larvae emerge from eggs laid on twigs above or directly on their host plants and molt between their first and fourth instars over a 2-year period, hibernating presumably within the soil duff layer before completing its pupation cycle in the 3rd year. In the Great Lakes region, adults fly annually between mid-May and mid-June, with biennial population spikes in odd years. As breeding adults, the males demonstrate lucking behavior, defending unvegetated territories that offer sunning opportunities for the females. Females are typically sedentary, spending most of their adult life nectaring after ovipositing away from the lek sites. Their range extends from northern Wisconsin to southeast Ontario. Preferred habitat is open rocky areas dominated by graminoids, and their presence in Wisconsin includes Burnett, Douglas, Bayfield, Vilas, and Merionette counties. For larval host plants, throughout the literature, various grasses and sedges are cited as host plant species, presumably associated with the regional availability and specific associations formed by the different subspecies. Of note, to the Northwest Sand Study area, various sources cite poverty oatgrass as a dominant host plant species, so these are often references to prior literary sources and not observations in the field. Studies in Ontario have recorded host plants including Pennsylvania sedge and mountain ricegrass. In the lower right here you can see an image of the larva. This was taken in Utah, the species being Oenius chryxus, that is in the second instar. For nectar sources, cherry blossoms and wild strawberry have been recorded as sources for Chryxus in Wisconsin and northern Michigan. And one Ontario study noted that blueberries were a common flower utilized by males while defending mating sites. As mentioned earlier, the vegetation surveys were a primary component of the summer internship, and the role of participating in that portion of data collection was to use the data collected to compose a habitat index for Chryxus Arctic in the Barrens, which you can see here. So we utilized known host plants and nectar species to synthesize vegetation data into a species suite. And on the map here, the Chryxus locations are scaled by abundance of the number of butterflies sighted at each location, being these orange butterfly shapes here. And the research plots, the triangles, were scaled by the number of nectar and host plant species at each data collection location. The map can be used as a habitat index to compare known Chryxus sightings to future locations of interest for butterfly surveys. And as you can see in the lower right of the map here and along some of the roadways, Chryxus locations were overwhelmingly located along access corridors within the Barrens, and I'll talk in a little bit about how the summer study can be utilized to better serve those surveys. So known unknowns. Referring back to gaps found in the literature, to date, little study has been conducted on populations of the Great Lakes region, with focus on distribution of Michigan and Ontario populations. A significant gap exists in the literature regarding the life history of this subspecies, the climatic sensitivity of which may serve as a critical indicator of ecosystem health in the Great Lakes region. Again, in the Great Lakes, there are two studies from Ontario, but most of the research that has been done on Chryxus Arctic comes from the western montane regions of the U.S. and Canada. And there's little habitat or behavioral research on Oenius chryxus strigulosa, the eastern subspecies. Questions that remain are, does this subspecies exhibit hill-topping behavior? There's some questions about oviposition behavior. Are eggs being laid on twigs, on grasses in the Barrens, or both? And one question particular to the type of habitat that we have in the Barrens is, how is the butterfly moving across the mosaic landscape, particularly through densely treed areas? So depicted here is myself, Crystal Curran, and Brian Harenga. And again, from the literature reviews that were done over the summer, these are recommendations for future study and analysis within the Barrens. To start expanding the butterfly surveys, again referring back to the map, utilizing what we've learned about vegetation preferences to expand surveys for Chryxus Arctic to some of those more distributed areas within the Barrens. The establishment of observation blinds to study behavior. This is a practice that's already being done with sharp-tailed grouse, and it would be fairly easy to amass volunteers to go out and watch butterfly behavior during that mid-May to mid-June flight period. If there's interest in studying individual behavior or looking closer into breeding habits, there are some studies that have conducted mark recapture surveys with butterflies that could be utilized in the Barrens. And referring back to the image of the larva that was taken in Utah, that study followed a female through its range to an oviposition site and established an enclosure and was able to monitor the life cycle of the larva as it developed. This is a practice that could be implemented here in the Barrens. So I'd like to give special thanks to the Lake States Fire Science Consortium for the internship opportunity over the summer, and thank my co-PIs on the project, Dr. Sarah Johnson from Northern College, Dr. Crystal Kern from U.S. Forest Service Northern Research Station, and Brian Harenga from U.S. Forest Service Washburn Ranger District. I'd like to also give thanks to field crew who were very informative and instructive with allowing me to participate in vegetation surveys over the summer. And I'd also like to give thanks to Dr. Jessica Minsel from Michigan State University, Cindy May from Northern College, and Lisa Williamson from Northern College. At this time, we'll open it up to questions.
So yes, if folks have questions, please type them in the chat box, and any of the other presenters online. If you have questions, go ahead and ask them. I'm just going to give people a heads up. I need to now switch to the other talk. I was not able to merge these. The webinar platform did not like the merge attempt. So go ahead and ask questions or get them in while I get the next talk set up. Or if you have any other comments, Sarah or Ryan, Crystal or Brian, go ahead.
Hey, Ryan, this is presenting next, but my question for you is, could you talk a little bit about kind of what you see as the big learning skill building opportunities that the internship provided for you?
Sure. My answer to that would be twofold. First, this was my first opportunity to participate in data collection, so there was kind of a high learning curve at the beginning with setting up transects, learning just to move across the landscape. I had some experience with identifying plants, but in the volume that was required for this project, it was really fun to build on that base skill set that I already had. And then also, I've had the opportunity to begin delving into scientific literature in some of my classes here at Northland, but to the scale that was required for the summer research, that was a new experience and something that I really learned to enjoy, looking at the amount of effort that's gone into just this one aspect of studying natural history in this part of the world. And yeah, it's really encouraging to see that there's a lot of opportunity to continue asking questions and figuring out creative ways to answer them.
Excellent. I don't see any other questions coming in now. So again, remember, folks, we'll have an opportunity to ask questions to any of the three projects at the end also. So, you know, feel free to type your questions in the chat box, and then we'll take a look at those at the end also. Rebecca, you should have control, so take it away.
All right, great. Can everyone hear me okay? I guess if you can't, just type in the chat and I'll see that. First off, I'd just like to thank the Lake States Fire Science Consortium for supporting this project. The funding for our intern was really critical for fielding a full crew last summer. What I'm going to present today is really the work of an amazing field crew that included a couple of research techs, 2 interns, including that Ellie McNary, who is supported by the Lake States Fire Science Consortium, and 2 really amazing graduate students, Annie Hawkinson and Lori Canosala. Ellie wasn't able to participate with me because she has, since her internship, graduated and gone off and is conducting another internship with the Forest Service out in Oregon. And this experience really was important for her in terms of kind of launching post-graduation internships. She gained field skills and plant identification. She learned about coordinating with agency staff who were involved in some of the prescribed burnings, and also got a valuable experience working part of a large and diverse team, which included working through team dynamics and conflict resolution and troubleshooting. So it was a really valuable experience for her and for all involved. This is also not my sole project. This project is being conducted in conjunction with the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, and our management partners are Lindsay Chartel and Charlotte Roy, who I believe are join us online, and Lee Freilich here, a colleague of mine in the department. So I want to start talking about a little bit about the habitat in which we're working. It's not a very well-studied habitat. These are brushlands. They are composed of a suite of community types, including northern alder swamps, northern wet meadows, shrub cars, and willow dogwood swamps. They're characterized by a mix of shrub vegetation dominated by very diverse willows, dogwoods, and alders, and then more open, sedge, herbaceous, wet meadow type type systems. And right now I'd like to give a huge shout out to Ellie and to the field crew, because getting around in this vegetation on foot is really challenging. I had someone mention that this beautiful looking sedge meadow here is like walking through a field of gigantic bowling balls to move through it. So it was a lot of challenging field work, and I just really give a lot of props to the field crew out there. So these lowland brush communities are fire dependent. American Indians use fire in these ecosystems to move game and also to keep them open, and today historically human and natural ignition serve to keep them open. Otherwise, these would succeed into either a wet forest type or homogeneous tall shrubs, so losing that patchiness. These ecosystems provide really excellent and important habitat for a diverse array of species, supports over 250 species of wildlife, from sharp-tailed grouse, sandhill cranes, migratory songbirds, which was the focus of our bird work, and woodcock, to beavers, bears, and deer. We actually saw a moose sign at one of the sites this past summer. There are over 80 species that use lowland brush that are listed on the Minnesota DNR's Species of Greatest Conservation Need list. And so a key management goal for managers here in the state of Minnesota is really keeping these dense shrubs at bay and maintaining that mosaic of shrub and open patches at the sites. This is done using prescribed fires, which are usually set in spring in the region in which we conducted our study. Work in other seasons is done in other parts of the state, but for the most part, the majority of burns in this area are done in the spring. Spring provides good conditions to burn. It's not too wet or too dry. There are cured fuels that have dried out in the fall and winter, but it is dormant season, and so I will come back to this in a minute, but may not meet all the objectives of reducing shrub cover and density. Historically, natural ignitions were caused by lightning, and this lightning occurred in all seasons except not so common in winter. In this project, and here's where my typo lies, we really ask whether fall and summer burns might be more effective at meeting goals. The reason that we had this expectation is that spring burns usually occur when plants are dormant, and during dormancy they have large levels of stored reserves in their roots and stems that are used to sprout in the spring. Thus, after a spring fire, shrubs may be well equipped to actually resprout after the fire and Thus, the management objective of kind of reducing shrub density and cover may be not met as well as a burn conducted in the summer or in the fall. Our project, as you probably expect since I'm talking about the Minnesota DNR, takes place in Minnesota in this region marked by the box. Let's get my arrow here. Over here, it's just west of Lake Superior. And within this region, we have 5 target sites in red and circled here. And our goal was to have 3 of these burn in all seasons. Each of our sites is broken up into 4 burn units of approximately 100 acres each, control, and then spring, fall, and summer burns. At each site, we had 8 sample points within each of the burn units. And at those sample points, we conducted avian bird counts in the first 3 weeks of June. And we also conducted vegetation and burn surveys at each point. And this is the area that the intern funded, that Ellie provided, was most of the work that she did on the project was with the vegetation and burn surveys. At each of our point count location, we actually had 2 vegetation plots. They were 3 meters in radius, in which we counted by species and height classes all woody vegetation in these 3-meter radius plots. And then nested within them were 75-centimeter radius plots in which we looked at herbaceous cover by species. These same plots were where we assessed fire severity. We actually tried out a number of different approaches. I'm just going to present the top kill surveys. This was another area in which the intern played an important role, really working on different approaches to assess severity and kind of seeing pluses and minuses of it and actually contributing to new ideas. So all of our plots were marked with a rebar stake so we could find them after the burn. And after burn, we would go back and determine the number of stems that were top killed or survived. This was a really super exciting year for us, and I think for having a, an intern supported by the Fire Science Consortium, in that we carried out 5 burns during 2017, and the May and August burns were ones in which the intern was able to participate in pre- and post-assessment. So we ended the year with 2 of our 5 sites with all of our treatments, which was a really, really exciting thing to have. I'm going to talk now about some of the early results, starting with some of the baseline data for birds and vegetation, which was actually taken in 2016, and then ending with some of the results from the top kill surveys as well as some of the post-burn early preliminary results. So prior to burning in 2016, the most common bird found in the point counts was the common yellowthroat. This was followed by sedge wren, alder flycatcher, and swamp sparrow. Both the sedge wren and the alder flycatcher are Lake State's Fire Science Consortium listed fire-dependent birds. A little peek at post-burn data, because I couldn't wait. That is that our point counts in 2017 were able to follow birds post 2 of our spring burns and 1 of the fall burns, and sedge wren was the most common bird detected in 2017. This is one of the fire-dependent species, and I'll come back to this in a few minutes. Overall, we found 106 total bird species in our sites, 24 of which were species of greatest conservation need for the state of Minnesota, and 9 of them are Lake State's Fire Science Consortium listed fire-dependent species. So what about the plant community? The plant community was an incredibly diverse set of willows, and anybody on the field crew became a willow expert over the course of the summer. There's more than 10 species of willow. We found 2 threatened species, a rubus species and a grape fern, which was very exciting, as well as a number of county records for new species. Perhaps less exciting is that we did encounter invasive species, and one of our questions going forward is how burning will influence the invasive species on the site. We found both of the buckthorns that occur in Minnesota. This is glossy buckthorn shown here, as well as species like tall buttercup shown on the right side of this slide. So next I want to talk a little bit about our burn survey early results. So this graph shows percentage of top kill as a function of 4 of the burns with which we've been able to assess top kill. Some of the later season this year burns were waiting till spring when things resprout to actually see what stems were top killed. And what you see here is that we had anywhere from, for spring and fall burns, 50 to 75% top kill of the shrubby vegetation, while the summer burn had much lower levels of top kill. These data are site-level data, so it averages across site. And one of the questions we had based on what we saw on the ground was how much of this difference in percent top kill had to do with really a difference and the amount of the site itself that was burned versus the actual severity of the burns where burns occurred. And to just get a little hint at that, we looked at how many of our sample plots were actually burned. So if you remember, there's 8 point counts, and at each point count there's 2 veg plots for a total of 16 veg plots. And we see that in the spring and fall burns, anywhere from 75 to 100% of our plots burned. So very good coverage of burns across the entire 100-acre sites, whereas in our summer burns, only 4 of 16. So that fire really burned in some areas, but not in other areas at all. So at the site level, there was less burn. So next we wanted to know, well, where they burned, what did severity look like? So this graph shows percent top kill again for the 4 burns, but only looks at data from plots that were burned. And what you see is that pretty similar levels of severity where burns occurred across the spring and summer, and it looks like slightly higher severity for our fall burns. What about birds? This is my last data slide and close to my last slide. This is a kind of preliminary look at how birds might be responding to the burns. This is the change in detections after treatment. And I want to first point out the no burn column. This is really from the controls that changed from 2016 to 2017. So this is kind of baseline. What's changing in the controls with which to measure whether the burn units are eliciting response. So let's look at the VERI to start out with. Right here, we see that they increase between 2016 and 2017 in the no burn. They also increase in the fall and spring. And since they're all the same, these increases in fall and spring burns can't really be attributed to the burns themselves since they were increasing everywhere. In contrast, those that are highlighted in yellow, for example, the alder flycatcher, which is one of the fire-dependent species, in our controls were declining between 2016 and 2017, but increased in abundance in both burn sites, suggesting that potentially they were responding to the burns. And we saw that for the common yellowthroat and then Asheville warbler in some of the burns. We saw declines in golden wing warblers in the burn sites, which I think is worth exploring more, and mixed results for some of the species. So that's what I have for you today. I want to acknowledge again my co-investigators, our funding sources, the Minnesota DNR through in-kind work, the Minnesota Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund, and especially the Lake States Fire Science Consortium, which supported Ellie McNary. I actually highlighted 2 here. These were both interns on the project. Our project has been a lot more labor and cost than we originally anticipated when we wrote the grant, And the funding from LSFSC has really been critical to successful and thorough field campaign last summer, including the assessment associated with, and very exciting for us, 6 prescribed burns. Thanks. I'm happy to take questions if I've left enough time, which maybe I haven't.
Oh, I think we can squeeze one or two. So yeah, if folks have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat box. There we go. You got one there, Rebecca. You read that? It says, how did you account for the change in detectability of birds in different seasons?
All right, I might actually ask my DNR colleagues to help me out. This, do you mean, so we always censused in the same season. We always censused over the same period of June, but that June, in some cases, the sites we were censusing had been burned and others had not been burned. So I think if your question is about sampling in different seasons, we actually didn't sample in different seasons. It was the burns that occurred in different seasons. Does that answer your question, Carly? Or was that what you were asking?
And
okay.
Yep, she says yes. And it looks like we have a, so DNR folks, they're typing, maybe typing an answer to that.
Okay.
See if there's any additional questions. And I'm curious, I mean, it's more related with the fire side. Kind of what were your phenological cues to say you were moving from spring to summer to fall? Did you guys kind of define that?
We largely used how our managers define those seasons in terms of their burn seasons within the management unit. Roughly, the spring burns happen prior to leaf out. The summer burns would have happened outside of the dormant season, so all of the vegetation would have been leafed out. And then our fall burns generally happen after there was a hard frost that would help cure some of the vegetation. So there is some, that's as close to phenological definitions I guess we have.
Sure, and that's fine. It's more just kind of, you know, we know what the guidelines you guys had or determined for.
Okay, secretive marsh bird. Let me see if I have any of this on. So Annie, our grad student, is the bird person on the project, and
she just typed in her answer.
Oh, good.
Oh,
good, Annie, you're on. I'm so glad.
Yeah, so she said yes to American bittern and yes to yellow rail. But yellow rail not in survey, it's just around site.
Okay.
Looks like she's continuing to type. And there we go. There's the rest of the answer.
Oh yeah, LeContes. I meant to mention LeContes because I'm a plant person actually. Everyone was so excited about LeContes when I was in the field with them.
That's great. Okay. Yeah, again, folks, feel free to type in additional questions. I don't see any right now, so we will be switching it to Adam and Evan. But again, we'll have time at the end to kind of have a full question session for any of these also. So make sure you type them in now as you have it. So again, thank you, Rebecca and others. And then Evan, Evan, you should be able to switch to the next slide and take it away.
You may have to give him presenter.
Yes, exactly. I'm saying that, but I did not switch it to you guys yet. So apologize for that. There, now you should have control, Adam.
All right, we see him. Okay. Well, thanks to both the presenters so far. And this is Evan. And what I'm going to do is introduce this project and kind of tell you where we got to before Adam took the reins and then launched off on a really great project. And so I guess we'll just dive right in. Looking at the Great Lakes, you know, the heart of the name behind this Fire Science Consortium, it's a really rich place in terms of human history, ecological history, and it's been really interesting to be involved with fire history research here because so much has gone on in the western United States because it's just so obvious. And there's been this really rapidly growing culture on engaging with fire, both in research and management in the Midwest. And the field trip that Lake States Fire Science Consortium led to the Muckle Barrens a couple of years ago, they had this map with it, and it's just a great illustration of the presence of fire-dependent communities in this region. And so as we start to grapple with how to manage these moving into the future, I like to think that history can guide our understanding in terms of how did these develop in the past and where are we going given current disturbance regimes and environmental conditions. This is Lane Johnson standing up, and that's Kurt Kipfmuller. This is in the boundary waters on Lac LaCroix. This is at the outset of Lane's master's thesis research, which he did a few years back. And Dr. Kurt Kipfmuller is a colleague of mine in the Department of Geography. And kind of started with Lane's work and then expanded into a broader project supported by the National Science Foundation. We've been working up in the boundary waters for a number of years now, documenting the historic role of fire in red pine forests throughout that area through treeing analysis. And the driving question of that project is looking at historical patterns of fire and how they may relate to human land use, especially Ojibwe land use prior to European settlement in the area and kind of the exclusion of traditional lifeways. And so this project has been really exciting. I think we've turned up some really interesting data, and part of the reason we could do it in the first place was that the boundary waters is this incredible area that supports primary forest and has the old red pine stands that still carry that record of fire. So it was a really good place to start this work. But when you look at the Great Lakes region, there are a lot of areas beyond the boundary waters where we know red pine was an important component of the pre-European landscape. But in a lot of places, these trees have been logged and they're gone for a long time. And so the question is, how can we better understand fire outside of the wilderness, kind of launching from that project as a starting point. And so we're going to look at the University of Minnesota Cloquet Forestry Center in this talk. And back in 2016, I gave a presentation off of some of our preliminary results from the boundary waters. And it was a great workshop put on by SFEC. It had a lot of people there, a lot of conversations, and a lot of opportunities to find out who's doing what throughout the region. And that was the first time that I met Kyle Gill, who had taken on the position of forest manager at Cloquet Forestry Center not too long before. And we started talking, and he took me for a ski out to a site called Camp 8 on the Cloquet Forestry Center. And it's old red pine, and all of those dark triangles you can see at the base are fire scars. And we started looking around, and they're both living trees that had a number of fire scars, as well as some dead and down trees and some stumps. And we got really excited because this meant that there was an opportunity to more of this fire history work outside of the boundary waters to start getting at a larger perspective of fire in the Great Lakes region. So that fall, ended up teaching a class seminar in the Department of Geography here. And it was themed all about people and fire in the Great Lakes research. It was a research-based seminar that was designed to engage undergraduate students in real authentic research. We didn't have a study design. We didn't know what we were going to find. And the class worked together to create the study and then implement it. It was a really fun experience as an instructor. Here's the crew nice and clean before heading up to Cloquet that fall. This long-haired guy, this is Adam. He's going to be talking to you in just a moment about his research. We went up, we cored trees to develop age structure data. We collected cross-sections from fire-scarred stumps and snags and logs. And then the students spent the semester sanding and learning how to conduct basic tree ring analyses to develop fire history for the Camp 8 stand at Cloquet Forestry Center. The gray lines here represent the individual samples that were collected for cross-sections, and the red lines indicate where those trees recorded a fire event. And then the bar chart at the bottom shows you the number of trees recording a fire during any given year. And this was really exciting. It was basically a proof of concept and showed that, yes, there is good potential to develop fire history data at the Cloquet Forestry Center. So this is Adam, and this is, he's on the right here, and this is one of the beautiful giant old red pine that we found on the edge of Camp 8. And it became pretty clear that there was an opportunity to work beyond just that stand. And I think that you know, throwing in puns, since this is a fire science consortium, you could say that really ignited an interest in Adam. And it was on the way back from a Burning Issues conference that the Lake States Fire Science Consortium held that we drafted up his application for the Lake States Fire Science Consortium internship, worked with Kyle Gill, and submitted a proposal to expand that work and build on what we did as a class, with Adam really taking ownership. And so, accidentally skipping ahead to a slide sooner than I thought, I'm going to stop talking, and I'm going to turn over the speaker to Adam so he can tell you about what he did through his internship.
This is Adam. So coming out of that seminar, we made some maps for scouting in April, in the spring of 2017. Another undergraduate student from that seminar, John Lai, and myself drove up to Minnesota and met with Kyle Gill at the Forestry Center. And we scouted in leaf-off conditions and made GPS waypoints of where fire-scarred material was, and we also used the original survey to help us determine where to look for these fire-scarred materials. In that summer, we went up and sampled 44 cross-sections, not 80, so 80 altogether, including what had been sampled at Cloquet, or at Camp 8, and we also cored 2 transects that summer, one in one old-growth red pine stand and one in another, in addition to the 2 transects we already had from Camp 8. And Liam, another a graduate student from Minnesota, was also there helping us out. We also had some young guys out there helping us core trees. So this is a map of where we pulled all of our samples from. You can see that the Camp 8 really had a lot of samples come out of that. You might even say oversampled. But we tried to get 4 to 5 from every other old-growth red pine stand that Kyle had indicated, and we also tried to broaden out our coverage as much as possible. So here's an example of a cross-section that we pulled. Here's the fire scars. We used cross-dating to assign absolute dates to the fire event years. Cross-dating was also essential in eliminating any errors due to locally absent rings. Like in this picture, you can see where the rings come together and pinch down. It looks like they're just one ring. That can cause errors unless you use the cross-dating method. And this was our complete data set. It's still preliminary right now, but these are the 80 cross-sections. And like Evan said before, gray bars are the lifespan of the sample, and the red vertical bars are the fire events, and where they coincide is where the trees recorded those samples. And we had a lot of pretty big fire years, especially the fire years from Camp 8, as it happens, because of the oversampling there. So our MFRI came out to 4 years, which we thought was pretty dang frequent, especially for this kind of forest in this kind of place. So why is fire so frequent at Cloquet Forestry Center? To answer this question, we turned to climate, and we compared the PDSI there, where positive values are wet years and negative values are dry years. And the larger red dots are fires that scarred 4 or more trees. And you can see that most of those larger fires tended to occur with drought. So to further analyze this, we conducted a SEA, a superposed epoch analysis, which is just a fancy word for saying that we averaged the PDSI conditions in and around fire event years. So this first graph is for all the years in our record, and we didn't find any significant results for that. We ran it again, this time only using fire years that scarred 2 or more trees, still no significance. Finally, we used fire years scarring 4 or more trees, and only before 1900, and found that the fire years were generally very dry years, and then 2 years after that, it was significantly wet, which seemed pretty strange to us. We think that possibly it could imply that there's some sort of cyclical process that drives fire at Cloquet, and we think potentially a teleconnection, but we haven't found a mechanism for it yet. So we understand now climate is really important, but not the only factor, because we didn't find significant results for every fire. So we turn to the human question. Kyle Gill provided a paper copy of a fire atlas from the early 1900s at the Forestry Center. I digitized it, and we see that 14 fires occurred between 1910 and 1932, and 11 of those 14 fires are listed as originating with a human ignition, and the other 3 have an unknown ignition origin. So I think that's very telling that people have been, at times at least, pretty involved in the fire regime here. To further research this, we looked at the PLS original survey, and the Camp 8 down there is one of the red pine stands at Cloquet Forestry Center, and you can see that the surveyor indicated what he called an old Indian village nearby, just across the river from these Pine Barrens. Furthermore, a guy named Trigg in the 60s used the original survey PLS data. He put it all together and connected a bunch of dots, and he also indicated a hayfield inside of those Pine Barrens. And this is an image that Lane provided of an Anishinaabe blueberry camp. So it seems that people have been burning there. There were certainly a lot of reasons why people would have wanted to burn. Lewis and Ferguson were talking to a guy from northwestern Alberta who said that burning is really good for hunting. We also spoke to the Fond du Lac foresters and a historian, and they told us that about every 5 to 7 years is prime blueberry interval, which is interesting because we have our total CFC MFRI is 4 years, but if you go to different stands and are just at that spatial scale, that MFRI value can actually change from about 3 to 10 years. Lane also provided a little bit of research to us, sent us an email, and we tracked down the source that said during the year 1890, it's estimated that the Anishinaabe picked at least $3,000 worth of blueberries, which then would have been $75,000 today. So definitely an economy for fire. People were probably igniting fires pretty regularly at and around our study site. And now that they're not, it has kind of changed the structure of these forests. The transects that we cored, this is the data here for them. We looked at the age structure of these old-growth red pine stands. So this is data from 4 transects from 3 different stands. And you can see that those red crosses are the red pine, and they were establishing great when fire was occurring regularly. And then you move forward past when fire suppression begins, and red pine pretty much stops establishing, and you start seeing a lot more hardwoods and white pine. something that we all know is red pine needs fire. And so our fourth result is that a decrease in that fire occurrence coincided with not only a decrease in the red pine regeneration, but an increase in more mesoid generation, more of that hazel. So the question now is, where do these old growth red pine stands expect fire to come from? If we want to keep them around, are we expecting lightning to ignite these stands frequently enough? Probably not. We can rely maybe a little bit on heat and other spontaneous combustion, but that probably happens even less likely than lightning. So we're left the human option. We have to think about what we want to do to get these stands what they need. And one of those things might be using the past that we put together here to guide the future. The story of people in fire around Cloquet is still very relevant today. There's still people, there's still pines there. That historical MFRI of 4 to 7 years led to the development of the old growth red pine stands that are there today, but they're not continuing to do what they were doing when fire was a regular process. So thank you guys for listening. Thanks to the LSFSC for funding the research, and thanks to Kyle Gill and the University of Minnesota for being there, helping us do this. What questions do you guys have?
All right, folks, yeah, remember if you got questions, get them in the chat box, certainly for Adam and Evan, and also then this is the last presentation, so if you have questions for the other two presenters, feel free. So we'll give her a few minutes here. We got some people typing. I see Ryan's typing. Ryan, feel free here on the phone if you wanted to ask the question, or any of the other presenters.
Sure. I was just curious about, in your data, I didn't see any fire scars pre-1750. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts as to why that is. Would that be a climactic thing, or what accounts for the absence there?
Yeah, good question. I think the reason why the fire occurrence kind of drops off in our data set as you go back in time is just because that's about when the trees that we still can get at today started living. So it was kind of almost, I don't want to say impossible, but really difficult to find fires or a record of fire as you go back further in time. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yeah.
And Joe Marshall typed in, he said, can you speak to the seasonal fire? Are you able to determine that from the scarring?
We can. So we're still working on it. It's still preliminary data, but we've found that a lot of the large fires, like the 1941, 1841, 1855, 64, 71, those fires were usually early season fires. 1905 was an early season fire. The only large fire that was a late season fire was 1894.
All right. And Paul Brewer asked, does each gray bar indicate an individual tree?
Yes, it does.
If there's any additional questions, again, either questions directly for Adam or Evan, or if you have questions for Rebecca or for Sarah and Ryan.
That shows cross seasonality a little bit more. So going back to seasonality, you can see the cells. If you look really close, you can kind of see where there is early wood. Here, that's how we were able to tell, like, say, if this was an early season fire or not. Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions?
If there's any additional questions. Because I have a question for, because all three projects, I don't know if you have time to answer them all, but really interested in what each you think are the next steps for the project beyond the internship project.
So Kyle and Lane at the CFC right now are looking to fund an internship for the summer, I think, to continue this work, but to take it off the Cloquet Forestry Center property and to kind of go around the property more and around the area there to investigate fire a little further.
And so I'm going to jump in just a little bit too, and it's been really fun to watch. So the data set that Adam put together and really taking ownership of that project. We went up there this fall and met with a few folks from Fond du Lac Forestry and Jeff Savage, who's the director of their cultural center and museum at Fond du Lac. And it seems like this data set is going to be a pretty nice catalyst for conversations about collaborations, interactions between Cloquet Forestry Center and the Fond du Lac Band. And so that's, and tree rings and fire scars are one avenue that conversation can take. So that's really exciting.
All right. Sarah and Ryan, or Rebecca and your collaborators, what would be your next steps?
Well, we...
Sarah, or whoever's talking, I'm sorry.
It's Rebecca. You know, we, let's see, I can't go back on the slides, but we had a number
I can try to get us there if you want.
happen late in the season last year. So I have the slides in front of me. So we had an October burn, a September burn, and then that late August burn, which we've started to assess. And so next year is going to be really exciting because in terms of the bird data, we will have all three types of burns implemented and in place for the June point count censuses. So being able to see, you know, what potential changes are being induced by the burns in terms of the bird community. And then for a number of these, it'll be the first season post-burn that we can look at vegetation responses. And so at this point, we really haven't been able to, we've looked at how the burns have kind of burned the vegetation, but really haven't looked at what the post-burn vegetation responses are. So I'm really excited for next summer's field season to be able to start looking at those data and collecting those data to be able to address those questions of post-burn vegetation response and really how effective were these burns in terms of the vegetation goals.
Okay, good. Yes. And let's hope we can get the burns all done. That everything cooperates so you actually have
so we get more burns.
Right,
yeah.
Exactly. All right. Sarah and Ryan, any?
Yeah, this is Ryan. I can say in terms of next steps for the Chryxus research, we're working on a paper to submit to the Forest Service that will synthesize the literature review and add more detail to some of those management recommendations that I had mentioned. In terms of management for the barrens themselves, I'll turn that over to Brian and Crystal if you want to talk about the ongoing prescribed fire out there.
Oh, Brian or Crystal, do you want to comment? Oh, Brian lost his phone connection. Well, feel free to type your answer in quick, Brian. Or Crystal, if you are on the phone, if you want to maybe make any comment on next steps.
On our end, on the research side, we'll be continuing to monitor our research plots and collecting information about habitat for the species. And I believe on Brian's end that they'll be using the report that Ryan generates to influence how they're going to be taking the butterfly surveys in the future.
Okay. We'll see if Brian is also typing anything in. yeah, if you have, if there's any additional questions, please get them typed in. Otherwise, any of the three projects, if there's any other comments you want to mention to kind of close us out, that'd be fine. And I can see Brian still typing. Oh, he said, yep, that is correct. So what Krista had mentioned. So, all right. I don't see any additional questions. So unless there's any additional comments you guys want to make, we'll go ahead and close this out. I really appreciate you guys combining. This is always a challenge to get everybody together and do the three intern projects at once. All the presentations are excellent. Hopefully the audio and visual came okay, and thanks to the audience for allowing us to kind of do that switch in the middle there. Just want to highlight our next webinar, which is next February, not next February, excuse me, February 15, 2018, so next month, and that's quantification of understory fuels in Superior National Forest using LiDAR data. That will be by Jeff Irwin. And there is the, if you're on the website, you'll be able to get onto that web page, find that link to that, or you can look, watch the newsletters, that kind of thing. So with that, we will close this out. And again, I want to thank Sarah and Ryan and Rebecca and her team that she had on, and then Adam and Evan. Excellent presentations. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for organizing, Jack.
Yes, thank you.
All right. See you guys.
Bye-bye.